YouTube. Today in the Naughty Librarian, I'm going over my favorites and least favorites of quarter one. So usually I just do like a year-end wrap-up of my favorites and least favorites, but I feel like that's rather restrictive. So I'm thinking this year I'm gonna do them quarterly. Like I'm still gonna do the end of year one, but that's coming obviously at the end of the year. But I wanna talk about more books. So I'm gonna do it quarterly, and these are my top 5 favorites and my bottom 5 least favorites, I guess, of all the books I've read in quarter one of 2021. Let's start off with the good stuff first, and then we'll just devolve into insanity of the bad ones. Here we go. I absolutely loved The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey, and you know what? Secret hit. I was not expecting to love this. I was hoping to like it, and then from chapter 1, sentence 1, I was like, oh shit! I was so surprised because I had read another book by Sarah Gailey, which was Magic for Liars, which I was like, about like, it's like noir Harry Potter, and I'm like I don't really like noir, so it was like a me problem. But I went into this book, same author, see if I like this one better, and holy shit, I was blown away. This one is kind of like a modern sci-fi Frankenstein retelling, and I'm into it. We're following these 2 women, Evelyn and Martine. Evelyn is a award-winning scientist. She's done, basically her whole career, she's been doing cloning work. And eventually her husband makes a clone of her named Martine, and this clone is supposed to be, you know, the perfect wife because Evelyn, much like Victor Frankenstein, has her own problems. And then, wouldn't you know, the cheating husband ends up dead and these 2 have to work together. And it's not an odd buddy comedy, it's more dark and broody and feminist and sci-fi and also Frankenstein, you know, they're like, it's alive, she's creating life. So I feel like my metaphor is apt here, but yes, oh boy, blew me the F away. I read it all in one day. It's fairly short, you probably could read it in a day as well. Freaking fantastic. Highly recommend, 5 out of 5 stars, go read this. Another surprise hit! I have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I mean, this one's a classic. A lot of people really like this book for the obvious reasons. And you know what? I hadn't really read Jane Austen until this year. The year of our Lord 2021 was the first time I read Jane Austen. And I was like living for it. It was one of those times where I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to fully commit to what's on the page here. And sometimes that's fun, especially when things are a bit melodramatic, because have you ever just read a book and just gasped at things? Like, it's so fun. Is it just me? Like, it's so fun to gasp at things. And this book, oh boy, the Regency era gasps. Oh my word. I'm not gonna get too into the plot on this one because it's Pride and Prejudice. We all kind of understand what this is about at this point. Also, I have a whole Drunk Classics episode on it, and oh boy, I went in. But yes, it's snarky, it's funny, it's romantic, and I finally get the Darcy Elizabeth ship, the ship of all ships. I finally get it, and I gotta read it. And like, it took me a while, but I was like, okay, Darcy, like, I see you, you're cool, you can hang. It took me a minute, though. Yeah, I was impressed with the level of snark and sarcasm. I mean, really, it could be called snobbery and sarcasm. It's that sarcastic, and I loved it. It was really fun. And now I'm like obsessed with it. All I want to read are like Regency era historical romances right now, whether they be smutty or not. Like, I'm just like fully in a Pride and Prejudice hole right now. Another one of my top 5 is The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons. This one was like just a fun book and also chonky. It is a chonker. This one is a bit difficult to describe because there's so much going on all at once, but it's an epic fantasy, and for all of you world building nerds, you're gonna lose your shit because the world building in this, chef's kiss. It's like so complex, and there's so many different cultures and groups of people and like their religion and how they interact with each other and their gods. It's all so well thought out. Like, there's a glossary in the back of this, like, and it goes past glossary. Frankly, it's an encyclopedia in the back of the book. There's a lot of world building done. the basic idea for the series, it's going to be 4 books, I believe. We have our plucky hero, Kieran. He is a bit of a rascal character, and he has to learn some magic, and he's got to defeat this demon king guy. Well, maybe not sort of. I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, they gotta save the kingdom because this demon-y guy is fucking shit up, and they're like, oh no, we can't have this happen because, you know, demons, they're bad. And Kieran is just like a plucky, lovable hero, and I was just really in the mood for a heroic fantasy rather than a grim, dark fantasy, because I've read so many, like, grim and dark fantasies. I just wanted something like, yeah, I want to root for the characters and not have them just be degenerates. So I had a lot of fun with this. Again, world building is top notch. It's a really, really great fantasy series, and it's a chonker, so you know you have to invest in it. It's a lot of book. Speaking of chonkers, I also really enjoyed A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I know, right? For those of you who have seen my videos for quite a while now, you know that I wasn't the hugest fan of the ACOTAR series. Like, I liked it just fine, but did I think it was fantastic? No. But this one, actually, I feel like Sarah J. Maas has progressed as a writer, and I mean, it's just better. It's better than the other books. I appreciate this heroine more. The first 3 books are about Feyre. We all get Feyre. We've seen that heroine a lot. And now we have Nesta, her older sister, who, quite frankly, is this a hot mess and self-destructive and just awful to be around. So already you're like, this is the heroine? But I'm like, just go with it, because it's more of like a redemption story and recovering from trauma. And also, you know, there's smutty face sex all over the book. Like, for real. Like, there was a whole thing with, like, Sarah J. Maas books being put in, like, the YA section for a long time, and this one's like, oh, you thought we were YA? That's cute. Here's, like, a sea of dicks. Like, it's just dick all the time. So, the smut factor has gone up several degrees. This one's just fully, like, it leaned into it. Like, that's why people are reading this, let's be real. Of course, there's cool action and fae drama and fantasy and all that kind of stuff, but people are really reading this for the smut. Like, let's all be honest for a minute here. And I really like this one. I thought it was really good. The only, like, I would say downside, I would think, is that Sarah J. Maas has a very particular writing style, which is that, oh boy, she writes chonkers. Like, this book, frankly, it's overwritten. Like, you could take out probably at least 1/4 to 1/3 of this book, and it would still be good. She just overwrites and, like, lets things go on for so long that I think someone perhaps needs to wrangle that. Like, especially if you can't handle, like, a lot of plot points that are maybe unnecessary, who I think you're gonna just want to throw this book across the room. But if you don't mind something that's too long, frankly, but you're enjoying the ride, then I recommend going for it. It is a chonker, but, like, I had fun with it, and, you know, the smut is just picked up several notches, so there's that. Last up on my favorites list, I have The Broken Girls by Simone St. James, and holy potatoes did I freaking love this. Obviously, it's in my favorites list. So this is like a murder mystery, ghost story kind of tale, and it also happens in 2 time periods. So you have the 1950s and these girls at this all-girls boarding school. It's kind of the school for misfit girls. Parents don't want them at home, so they send them off there for various reasons. Basically, they're unruly, or perhaps this is a child of with the maid, so to speak. So all these girls get sent off to this school, and 4 such girls are roommates, and they form this really intense bond with each other. And there's a murder, and they have to solve it. Cut to modern day, and then you're following this woman. She's a reporter, and her sister was murdered, like, in the 1990s, and her murder took place on the grounds of this all-girls boarding school that had been closed for, like, decades. So both these stories are intertwining due to the same location, and also a ghost. You heard that right. There's an actual ghost in this book. So it has horror elements and also murder mystery elements. There's a big murder mystery here that you're just like, who did this? And I mean, it's kind of just like, I didn't guess the killer. It just comes out of nowhere, but like in a good way. And I didn't guess the killer, and I'm really good at that. So if I don't guess the killer already, it gets like my vote of approval. It's dark, it's gritty, it's got a ghost, and oh, like these characters are just like so complex, and they're all dealing with their own like trauma in different ways, and there's a lot of really intense female friendships that I love reading about. So really, this is just a masterpiece. It's so good. Go read this now. There's a ghost, for heaven's sakes. All right, so that's enough with the good. Let's get into my least favorites. It's a list. I really couldn't get into The Widow of Rose House. I referred to this book as a bland souffle several times. It's kind of like all the ingredients are there, and you bake the souffle and it rose. It's edible, but then you realize you forgot to put sugar in it, so you just got egg whites you're gonna eat, and it's like, well, it's edible. It's probably gonna taste terrible though. And that's kind of what's going on here. It has all of the elements it needs to be a novel. And it's baked well. It's a whole book, and it has a beginning, middle, and end. It has a story arc. It has all that stuff. But there ain't no flavor in it. And it's just, ooh, boy, bland souffle. And here's the thing, like, I don't hate this book because, frankly, I would have to care about it in order to hate it. And I can't get a rage boner for this book. I just didn't care enough. You would think it would be really exciting because this is a literal ghost story. There's a ghost, a real one. And also, you know, gothic mansion and romance, and you're hoping for all this cool stuff, and it was just like, it just didn't gel right. It didn't work. There were several things that I was just like, okay, pick a direction and stick with it, because I don't think you have a certain direction you're trying to go towards. So it's just like a lot of stuff that's aimless. And I'm really trying not to, like, spoil the plot. I mean, what plot? But still. There's this widow, she buys this old decrepit house that's haunted. There's this guy who's a scientist, and he's like, hey, I like hunting ghosts. Can I hunt this ghost in your house? And she's like, no. And he's like, please. And and then she's like, okay. And then he goes to the house and hunts the ghost, and then they, like, fall in love. And they both have, well, she has a dark past, and he is just, like, a wunderkind. He's like scientist in the streets and rake in the sheets, because of course that makes sense. And it's just like a lot of character development that doesn't make any sense. It's just there because I think just throw things you like in a book and hope for the best. But like, I don't hate it. It was fine. It's just bland, I guess. I don't know. Sticking with that historical romance kick, I also have The Heiress Gets a Duke by Harper St. George. Again, I don't hate this book. I can't get a rage boner for it. It's fine. It did what it did. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and a story arc. It's successful in that regard. But still, this is like a book where character motivation makes no sense at all. And I keep getting told these very specific things about these characters. Like, I get told that the male lead in here is a rake. And he does nothing to suggest that. All he does this whole book is be responsible and honest and, like, good and bad. Like, that's all he does the whole book. He's respectable and honest. Like, what? How is he a rake? It's kind of one of those stories where you have, you know, like a sassy heiress and then a penny poor duke who needs to marry for money, so he has to go find an heiress, and then he finds one, and mind you, never lies to her. He's just like, yeah, I'm broke as shit. I need to marry an heiress. I like you though. Like, he's honest from the get-go. There's no like her finding out, oh, you only wanted me for my money. He's like, no, like, I'm telling you right up front. And he wants this money so he can, like, help all the people he's supposed to be lord of. Like, he has responsibilities and he needs this money to make everyone's life better. Like, he's responsible and honest the whole time. And everyone keeps calling him a rake. And it's like the only rakish thing he does is, like, he boxes sometimes. And I keep getting told that, like, the heroine in this is supposed to just be really opinionated and headstrong, and really she's not. Does she have, like, strong opinions? Yes. Does she ever, like, willfully talk back to men in this time period. No, she's like quite the lady. So it's like, okay, so you want freedom in your life. I get that, but you're not sassy. I keep getting told you're supposed to be sassy, and then you're not sassy. This is like, it's just basically the definition of telling, not showing. I keep getting told things, like specifically told things about these characters, and none of their actions suggest that. So it's like, so yeah, it just fails on that level. But like, I want to say something nice. I mean, like I said, it does have a beginning, middle, and end, and a plot arc. Like, it's a book. It's a book. Also on this list is The Rules of Magic by Alice Hoffman. And here's the deal with this one. Do I think this is a bad book? Actually, kind of no. It's not really a bad book. It's just not a book for me. And for many reasons. And like, I DNF'd it. I read like 60% of this book, I'd say. So I gave it a go, and I just stopped caring, and I think I could like figure out where things were gonna go from here, and I just bleh. Basic idea here, this is a prequel to the story Practical Magic, which is also a movie from the 90s, and there's these sisters and a brother, and they're all witches, and it's the 1960s, so it's kind of like Forrest Gump, but witches. They're living in New York. They're experiencing all of like the highlights of the 60s. They have the Vietnam War in there. They have all this stuff. They live in like, the artist part of New York. So all of the swinging 60s is like accounted for here, but also, growing pains and witches. And there's a curse because their family has been cursed that any man who falls in love with an Owens woman will be doomed. So, they have issues with dating. I stopped caring about the drama of these characters because it was just like, just like being too messy. Like, there's one thing about characters being allowed to be messy and make bad decisions. Like, I get that and I appreciate that in a character. But when your character, like, only makes bad decisions, it's just like, this is the character I want to read about? Because the answer's no. However, do I think it's well written? Yeah, it's not a bad book. It's just not the book for me, for those reasons in particular. Another disappointment was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. Oh boy, did I want to enjoy this. Like, I read like 50% of this book. Like, I read a good chunk of it. I gave it a go, and then I DNF'd because, like, I literally could not give a fuck. This is a debut, and it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling. However, it's set in 1920s Shanghai, and there is a magical disease or monster or something going around that's making people literally rip their own throats out. So, I mean, for concept points, 5 out of 5. Will read again. Like, change nothing of your concept. It's fantastic. And yet, boring. And that's the problem. Fantastic concept. Just boring execution. Literally, there are people ripping their own throats out. Like, throat is gone. Blah, 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 blood. Like, that is an intense image. And I was bored as shit. Like, how does that happen? And I think it's because just wrong things were being focused on in the story. And I feel like these characters needed more emotional development. I feel like they just needed those moments where you're like, ooh, you dug deep into that trauma. So when lighter things are happening in the story, it has more contrast. Because right now it's just all gray. I need the blacks and the whites. I need like the contrast up. This book is just no contrast. It's just kind of the same tone for everything. And that's why I am not excited by people ripping their throats out, because who cares? But like I said, setting is cool, a retelling Romeo and Juliet, but with like rival gangsters in the 1920s in Shanghai, magical throat ripping. Fantastic. So I think I would read something else by this author because, whoo boy, that is an amazing concept. Execution, not as good. But this is a debut, so I don't know. Like, I would read something else by this author, but this one, it's not good. Last least favorite book was The Black Company by Glen Cook. And this was a book I was like, oh gosh, I need to wash my brain out with bleach, and then I need to burn this with fire. Like, oh boy, this one I hate. It's from the 80s, I believe it was written in the 1980s, and it's supposed to be like one of the original grimdark fantasies. So for that value, I was like, okay, I read grimdark fantasy, like, let's see where it came from. What's the, like, the start of it? And it's this, and I was like, oh boy, have we done it better since? Like, there are concepts in this book that I think are good. Like, you can make the parallel between some of the characters in this book and situations to people who came back from the Vietnam War and, like, their trauma and the horror they saw there. It comes through in the writing, so it has that going on. However, I feel like it's just demented for the sake of being demented. And we're following these characters who they're on team bad guy. Like, oh my gosh, like, their side of this battle, this war, are just committing atrocities on the daily. And it's not until halfway through this book that the main character is like, wow, I think we're the bad guys. Like, they didn't understand until then. And frankly, there is graphically violent, horrendous things on page, like, in chapter 1. So, like, by halfway through the book, you're just like, bro, like, really? You've seen some shit. Like, how did you not figure this out? And huge trigger warning here for sexual assault on page with a child. So it's like, wow, this is chapter 1. Already I was like, I need to scrub my brain out with bleach. This is gross. I don't feel like it was written with any type of sensitivity to the subject matter. It was written to be horrible, which I mean it is, but from the wrong tone. Like, we never dive into that trauma at all, and I don't think this author understands that, and it's just kind of never talked about again. And it's like, that's traumatic. And the characters are just, like, they're just stupid, and, like, they're ineffectual. The main character, he just has no story arc. There's nothing going on there. There's, like, this side character who, frankly, I would have wanted to read a story about. Like, he's fucked up. When we first get introduced to his character, he literally strangles his wife to death. So, I mean, whew, what a character, like, opener here. But throughout the course of the book, he also becomes, like, reluctant father figure to that little girl that they saved in the beginning of the book. So it's like, that's a character arc. You wife murder to reluctant father saving this child. So, like, oh, I would have wanted to read that book, because that is a gritty character who has flaws but has other parts of their character, and he's not the main point in the story. And it's like, why are we not following him? We're following this one guy who does nothing but, like, put band-aids on people and write fan fiction. Like, what are we doing? So yeah, I hate it, burn it with fire. Like, it's so bad. And, like, trigger warnings. I recommend looking them up if you need them, but, like, I think I've mentioned a few here. It's just, well, brain bleach. It's a lot. I feel like I've run the gamut right now of all the books I really loved and all the books I was like, about. Luckily, only one of them I truly hated. The rest of them I was like, meh, about. But, like, oh boy, there was, like, some I genuinely love. Like, I feel like I will bring them back on my year-end favorites of list. So far so good. I've read some very good things and some very not so good things, but that's, you know, everybody. Let me know in the comments down below, what's your favorite book you read so far in 2021? Or what's the book you're like, oh gosh, burn it with fire from 2021? What's your top and bottom so far? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, make sure you give it a like. And if you want to see more videos, make sure you subscribe. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye!